Think I see you now, Joel. You just appeared, and here you come. Joel, can you hear me? Hey, our technology's working.
Hey.
Hey, did your book come out today?
Yes, it came out today.
Red November. I am reading it even now as we speak and loving it, actually. I love your writing. I
Thank you.
mention you often on my Periscopes. And you, just for people who don't know you, are, according to the book jacket, senior editor at large and in-house counsel at Breitbart News. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, the thing I loved about this book is that you, as a conservative writer, if I can call you that, author, were following around the Democratic primary folks and writing about it, your personal experience as well as the fabric of it. And I have to give you a compliment now, if you don't mind. You don't mind, do you?
No, not at all.
I love there's something you do in your writing that this is just sort of a nerdy writer thing that you notice that maybe the regular public doesn't notice. But you do not step on a joke. And what I mean by that is that throughout the book, I found myself chuckling at things that were funny, but the way you presented them was completely factual, but the way you said it out just made it funny. So what I like about it is a bad writer would add the joke to the joke, but the material was the joke. And my favorite one there that you added no joke to it because it didn't need it. It was just a plain description. Was about the so-called pussy hats and how they became popular, but they had to retire it because the transgender community argued something about the necessity of a vagina, and it was not inclusive enough, and it went away.
Yeah.
It would have been so easy for you to add a little joke to that, just a little irony. Of ironically, it went away, and the fact that you just played that straight as a writer, I just said, all right, that's some good writing there, because it would have been so easy to step on that, and you didn't. All right. So that said, your writing style is excellent. It makes the whole thing work, and I like the fact that I will let you talk in a minute too. I know my audience gets mad at me when I do this. So let me just jump right into that. As you were following the Democratic primary process around, you had a number of notable encounters. And I'm interested, how often did you get recognized just visually as being sort of a Breitbart kind of guy in this crowd of liberals? How often did they spot you?
Once in a while, it became more of an issue the further in we went. And toward February of this year, that's when people stopped talking to me quite as freely. That's when I got recognized, yeah.
Now, is that because they were on to you? What changed?
I think what happened was kind of a general paranoia. It really started at Bernie Sanders events, and I have to say this as a compliment to the Bernie Sanders campaign. They were the friendliest toward media, including me. I never had any trouble with the Bernie Sanders campaign. They were open to everybody. But I think they felt like their candidate was getting crowded out. Their candidate was getting railroaded by the establishment. And so there was this kind of paranoia that began to set in toward everybody. It wasn't just me. And Bernie Sanders supporters became less willing to talk to me the closer we got to Super Tuesday.
Yeah, everybody was getting a little tense by that and a little distrustful. Now, did you find let's say, a personality difference in general with the different campaigns? You mentioned the Bernie personality, if you will, but was there a Klobuchar personality, for example? Did the others have a character to the crowd?
Well, it's interesting. The one that stood out for me the most, I mean, you can imagine Bernie Sanders supporters tended to be young students and aging ex-hippies, for example. The Biden personality tended to be someone wearing a Union jacket, that sort of thing. But there was one personality that changed over the course of the campaign. When Pete Buttigieg started, it was very gay, his campaign. I mean, his supporters tended to be very much from the LGBT community. But once Elizabeth Warren faded, what was interesting was a lot of the soccer moms that supported Elizabeth Warren migrated over to Pete Buttigieg. And wherever I went in Iowa, Pete Buttigieg was surrounded by middle-aged white ladies. He had this incredible magnetism. And so that changed. That was interesting.
Wow. And you had some tense encounters with some candidates, including Joe Biden. For people who didn't see that in the news, because you made news with that, can you tell them about that?
Yeah, so at the Iowa State Fair in August last year, I had an opportunity to ask Joe Biden about the Fine People hoax, because remember, he launched his campaign claiming that Donald Trump had called neo-Nazis very fine people, which viewers of your Periscope will know never happened.
Right.
And I said to him, are you aware that you're misquoting Donald Trump? And he insisted that this happened, and he got red in the face, and he confronted me, and it was this viral video moment. It went everywhere. And by the time I bought my fried Oreos or whatever I ate as a snack after that press conference, you got to buy something fried at the Iowa State Fair. The video had gone everywhere. But it didn't have any effect on Biden. He still sticks to that fine people hoax even to this day.
Yeah, there's no effect to information. It just bounces right off of everybody. Now, I'm very interested, since you got to see Biden live a number of times and up close, because you were literally talking to him in that exchange, and now you've watched him through his basement Biden phase. Is it my imagination, or is it obvious that he has faded even since January of this year? Is that my imagination?
He has faded, and what's interesting is the degree to which people haven't reported it.
Yeah.
But there's one moment that stood out for me. I was in South Carolina covering Joe Biden, and he was in a town called Spartanburg, which is a very nice place, and he gave his stump speech, and then it was clear he forgot to conclude. Whatever he was supposed to say at the end, he had left out inadvertently, but they had already started playing the music to end the presentation, and people were already filing out of the room, leaving, and he grabbed the microphone back and said, wait a minute, and then he started shouting over everybody. People are already leaving, but he's sort of shouting the conclusion that he forgot to add. And I looked at this and I thought, something's really not right here. This is just the strangest thing I've ever seen.
But could you put a descriptor on how you think he might have changed? The sort of non-sentences and the confusing stuff, is there more of it now?
There is more of it now. I think he's just having trouble remembering words. There was a point last week he wanted to criticize Donald Trump for America First, and Biden couldn't remember the word first. He sort of says, well, America, the same thing he did with the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. You know, the thing. So there's that, and I think he can manage it for short stretches. It's not consistent. He can do the debate for about an hour, but then he starts to fade. And what was interesting to me, and this again is not reported anywhere other than in my book basically, but Joe Biden never did a single spin room after any of the debates. There were 11 or so debates, and Joe Biden did not linger after the debates to talk to reporters even once. And I think that's partly because he was afraid of gaffes and his campaign was steering him away from reporters, but also because it was just too late at night. It was past his bedtime, and I think it was a real concern for the campaign that people would see he had deteriorated.
Yeah, did you see him walking, and did he have any trouble just walking on his own? He can walk fine, can he?
Yeah, he can walk fine. He's physically okay. For the most part, there was that moment where he had a burst blood vessel during, I think it was the climate change town hall, and his eye sort of seemed to fill with blood. So he has a few physical things going on, but walking, right, he seems okay.
Yeah, a few physical things is probably an understatement. I'd love to see his medicine cabinet. I've got a feeling that's bristling with stuff. So, which of the candidates, let's say, surprised you the most when you got up close? Was there anybody who jumped out and you said to yourself, this person could have been president, they just didn't make it to the finals?
That would be Amy Klobuchar. She had the most presidential quality. She was a very serious candidate, and she actually lasted right through to the end, even though she had no money and very little support from the media and from the party. And in a way, she suffered from the impeachment because the impeachment kept the senators in Washington during a key period right before the Iowa caucuses. It's almost as if the Democratic Party interfered in their own primary. So while, Pete Buttigieg could walk around Iowa for weeks on end, Amy Klobuchar had to sit in the Senate listening to these endless presentations, and it happened right at a point when she was surging in Iowa. So it really cut her campaign off before it could blossom. She peaked eventually, but she peaked too late.
Well, it sounds like systemic white supremacy because they let the white guy who didn't have a job wander around and get elected, or at least win the primary, while the well-employed woman had to go to work. Well, it's terribly unfair.
Right.
So, did you find that people had, let's say, arguments that they wanted to bring you when they would see you in the crowd, or did they just have hate?
Actually, most of my interactions with people, right up until the end, were positive, and it was reassuring to discover that the people in the audience at Democratic campaign events weren't really that different from people in the audience at Republican events. They just had a different mental map of the world, but people are basically the same. The one really hysterical thing that happened in terms of audience interactions was Beto O'Rourke had an event at an historically black college, Benedict College in South Carolina. And I went there and I tried to find the event. It was on campus somewhere. The students were incredibly helpful. People showed me where it was. And I'm in this room. There are about 200 black students in the room waiting for Beto O'Rourke. And then one of his campaign staffers came over and basically ejected me from the meeting. And for no reason, no explanation, but they found out I was from Breitbart and they called the police officer over and he escorted me off the campus. And, there was no negative interaction with the people in the room whatsoever. But later on, when reporters said to Beto O'Rourke, "Why'd you kick the Breitbart guy out?" the campaign said, "Well, because we felt he was threatening to the students." And I'm just like, sitting there. And in a way, it was this weird moment because CNN, which hates Breitbart and would like to see us out of business, CNN actually defended me, and they gave a very negative portrayal to Beto O'Rourke's kicking out of this Breitbart reporter. And in a way, it was the beginning of the end of the O'Rourke campaign, because he had campaigned as a great champion of press freedom, and here he was kicking people out of an event at a black college.
Well, now, was it CNN defending you, or were they, let's say, wanting to get Beto out of the race because they had a favorite?
It could have been that also, yeah. Beto was definitely an early favorite. They gave a lot of coverage to him on the day he launched, but then he started jumping on tables and waving his arms around, and I think they decided this wasn't going to work.
Yeah, they figured that out early. All right. What is your best explanation of how Biden made it through the pack?
Well, the simplest explanation is just the party establishment decided they did not want Bernie Sanders, a non-Democrat, taking over the party the way Donald Trump, a non-Republican, had taken over the Republican Party. And Bernie Sanders, going into South Carolina, had won the first 3 primary contests. He was the first candidate of either party to win the popular vote in the first 3 contests of any primary. He won Nevada on February 22nd with almost 50% of the vote. So he looked completely dominant. He was doing incredibly well among Latino voters. And the Bernie Sanders supporters were already talking about his cabinet picks. I was in the spin room after the Nevada debate, and Jeff Weaver, his advisor, was saying, well, it's a little too early to be picking the Secretary of Education and all this. They were almost there. They could taste it. They could feel it. And I think the party establishment, which at the time didn't believe they were going to win the election, now they think they are going to win. But I think at the time they didn't think they were going to win, but they thought, you know what, if we're going to go down, we're not going to go down with this guy running the party. We want to maintain control of the Democratic Party. So they united against him and decided that even if they were going to lose, they were going to lose with a Democrat, not with a socialist.
Do you think there were any dirty tricks that the Democrats played against other Democrats to get Biden through? Did the Democratic Party put their finger on the scale?
Oh, yeah. There were all kinds of leaks against Sanders. Once Sanders became a threat, there were all sorts of things that were leaked, including allegations of Russia collusion. That he had been briefed by intelligence agents that there were some efforts by Russians to infiltrate his campaign. That story came out and was reported in the mainstream media as if it was happening in real time, but in fact it had happened several weeks before, and Sanders had been briefed about it, and it wasn't something for public consumption. But they basically went with the Russia collusion narrative to try to take down Sanders.
But I don't think, as I think about it, I don't think Bernie was taken down by any news. Like, it doesn't seem like there was a news report that necessarily moved the needle, because facts don't really change things. So it feels like something else happened. Like, maybe was it who was the big recommendation in South Carolina?
It was James Clyburn. He's the House Majority Whip and the most senior African American leader in Washington today, and he came out in favor of Biden. There were also a couple other things that happened that were interesting. When Barack Obama ran for president in 2008, he also had to deal with South Carolina, and there the Democratic Party establishment is very strong. They've got union groups, church groups, and so forth. And Hillary Clinton had all of those groups wrapped up. So Barack Obama went to the rural areas, and he spoke to black voters in the countryside. Bernie Sanders didn't do that. Bernie Sanders was still sticking to the urban centers and the college campuses, and so it might have been a strategic mistake on his part. But also, he just had trouble really closing the deal with black voters in South Carolina. But James Clyburn was huge. I mean, Joe Biden had never won a primary in 3 presidential campaigns, had never won any state until James Clyburn came out and said, you got to vote for this guy.
So it felt like when Clyburn gave his recommendation, he was kind of saying that you're not voting for Biden, you're voting for all of us, sort of the established Democrats. It sort of felt like that was the change in the frame there.
That was exactly what happened, and he gave a long speech about the civil rights movement and all sorts of things that Joe Biden had very little to do with, and all of that was to be defended by voting for Biden. And to be honest, when I went to events in South Carolina, it did feel a little bit like a family reunion around Joe Biden, that he was kind of the legacy of Obama, even though Obama hadn't endorsed him. It was kind of like bringing the old band back together, the good memories of that Obama campaign. And so Biden represented that. And that's one of the reasons he had a connection with this electorate, which was new because Biden had really no constituency in the black community before Barack Obama plucked him out of the sidelines and put him on the ticket. But that's what it was in South Carolina. It was a sense of familiarity and a connection to Obama, too.
Now, let me ask you about a little bit of process. What the heck is it like being an author who has a new book that just came out, which I'll show again to my audience, Red November, Joel Pollak. Excellent. I'm reading it right now and enjoying it very much. And what's it like doing a book tour when you can't do all the normal things you would do? Are you trying to do it mostly remotely?
Yeah, you have to do it remotely. And the only good news is if you want to make the bestseller list, everybody else trying to sell a book is also in the same boat. So you're all on a level playing field in that sense. But the other interesting thing about it is people have time to read. So the market for books is still there because people are at home and they're looking for interesting things. But just in terms of process, balancing it with an everyday job, I have to say that your approach, systems rather than goals, is really how I got this book done. You can do anything if you break it down into small enough pieces, and just doing it day by day allowed me to get it done.
I was also impressed at how you found a way for your day job and your book to be part of the same process. So you could double up on your productivity there. So that worked out really well for you. What is there about the book that I haven't asked that you would? This is the ultimate bad interviewer question. No, let me give you. I'll tell you the worst book interviewer question since I've received them all. I'll do it. You can't see me, but I'm opening your book on video to a random page, and then I say, you talked about Zelensky's predecessor on page 143. Can you tie that to the larger Biden theme vis-a-vis Bernie and socialism and how that relates to Black Lives Matter? Go. it's it's like, I don't know, that's nothing about my book, But no, I like to ask this because often an author will say, all right, I got my 3 anecdotes and I'm looking for the place to fit them in. And if I didn't give you a place, you might have an anecdote ready, and I'm just giving you that opportunity.
Well, you have the smartest audience in political media. So I could go on and talk about the likelihood that Democrats would bring about a socialist revolution after November, and I actually believe that. But on your Periscope, you break it down beyond left, right, Democrat, Republican. You really get to the underlying meaning. So I actually had something I wanted to draw your attention to specifically when I thought about what I would say on your Periscope.
Okay.
And I talk about this a little bit in the book, but one of the reasons the Democratic Party moved so far to the left was because of the media, and specifically CNN. And Republicans like to criticize CNN because they hate Trump, even though they're supposed to be neutral. So it's kind of a running gag. It's fraudulent, whatever. But they did something, I think, that had a uniquely destructive effect on the Democratic Party without meaning to. And that was they held a series of issue-based town halls. Every network holds town halls with candidates. That's fine. You can ask the candidates questions and so forth. But CNN decided they were going to devote airtime to specific issues. Like they had a climate change town hall. They devoted 7 hours of programming to climate change. They also had an LGBTQ town hall. And the problem with doing these issue-based town halls is that the people in the audience, in the room, are the activists on that particular issue. And so the candidates compete with one another to please that audience. And so they become more and more extreme in the things they say. So the stuff that was coming out of the Democratic candidates, even the smarter ones like Andrew Yang, on the climate change town hall, for example, was just crazy. I mean, you had Kamala Harris talking about plastic straws and Andrew Yang talking about forcing everyone to buy electric cars. It was nuts. And it was just basically creating campaign material for Donald Trump because he could just show how crazy these candidates were. And the moment of all... Oh, go ahead.
Well, how much of that is just because there were so many of them and they needed something to break through? So they had to violate expectations or else they would disappear.
I think that's part of it. I also think it's part of the way the Democratic Party is constructed. It has a lot of different interest groups, and if you don't pay them enough attention, they claim that you're silencing them. So, there was this moment in the LGBTQ town hall where, CNN had done a special event around these issues, and there was a black trans woman who got up. In other words, someone who's biologically male but identifies as female, who got up in the middle of someone else's presentation, ran to the front, seized the microphone, and started screaming about how CNN was ignoring black trans women. Well, it was hilarious, and Republicans had a good laugh because it was sort of a strange window onto the Democratic Party. But that's what happens. If you don't give every little interest group its platform, then people will complain about it.
Well, I'd like to amplify that criticism, which is CNN does not give enough time to black trans people. So
That's right.
I think they need to answer for that a little bit. All right. Joel, thank you so much. Again, it's Red November, available now. It's climbing up the charts. And you're going to want to read this because it's a really good read. I love your writing style. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for the opportunity, and back to my simultaneous coffee.
All right. Take care. All right.